Archbishop, I'd like to find out a little bit about your early life. What was your early family life like? Any indication then that you would become a priest?
No, none. I spent my early childhood in Russia and Persia, because that's where my father served. And then with the immigration, we came to the West, and I was brought up as a boarder in a most ordinary school. I wasn't a believer then in the sense that, owing to circumstances, I had had no contact either with the gospel or Christ in a personal way, or even less perhaps with the church. And to all intents and purposes, I was an unbeliever as far as believing is concerned, and very anti-church as far as going to church is concerned.
When did you become a Christian?
When I was about 15. I was then a member of a youth organization, and it was religious on the fringe, as it were, because it was part of being a Russian. And I was submitted one day to a priest's discourse on the gospel, on the church, and on Christ. And it revolted me to such an extent that I decided to find out whether there was any truth in what he had said. I went home and decided to check. So I asked my mother for her book of the gospel, but it isn't really the reading of the gospel that convinced me. It's something which probably a free churchman, an evangelical, would call a conversion experience. Because while I was reading the beginnings of St. Mark's Gospel, I became overwhelmingly aware of the presence of Christ standing on the other side of the desk. And it was so clear and so certain that I looked up the way one looks around in the street when one has an impression that someone looks at your back. I saw nothing, perceived nothing with my senses, but the certainty was so great that I knew that I had met Christ alive. And if I had met Christ alive, then all the gospel was true.
You found no conflict then through your study of medical science and theology?
No. You see, I never tried to make the Bible into a book of natural history. And I never tried to check scientific knowledge by religious presuppositions that would be formal and really external to the purpose. I always felt that even if we cannot always see the way in which things link, the knowledge of the world in which we live is theology, the knowledge of God and of his works, that a priori they cannot conflict, and that if one has intellectual and moral integrity, one must follow each line in its own rights. If there had been conflict, I would have faced it, but I never met it. My spiritual life went along one line. My intellectual life only enriched what I knew of God and of his world. And perhaps was I too simple, but it never, both never conflicted with one another.
Do you think God wants us to suffer?
I would say, I'm sorry to be so stubborn, I would say he wants us to love,
Yes.
not to suffer. But suffering is always inherent to love in a world which is disharmonious, ugly, violent, aggressive, and so forth. He does not want to suffer. He wants us to love. Yet, he warns us, love means death. A shedding of blood, heart blood or physical blood.
So death is at the center of suffering.
Well, death is the full measure of it. Death is really, with its sharpness and its finality, the test of your readiness to love. I feel that the great mistake which a Christian can make, and I say Christian because there is a background of faith attached to my statement, is to allow himself to think and consequently to feel that with the death of the person, things have come to an end. If we really believe what is our Christian faith, that God is a God of the living, that for him and in him everyone is alive, that there is a future which is eternity, then the death of the person is a moment, tragic, painful, of separation. I wouldn't say more tragic or more painful than the separation which occurs as a result of an iron curtain or a closed frontier or the gates of a prison. But anyhow, a separation. But with the difference that if a person is truly alive in God, and so are you, there is a present and a future and not only a past. And instead of rehearsing the past to make the present more dark, one should face the present, which is a transitory separation, in the expectation of a future meeting. And not simply as wishful thinking, but as an active preparation for it. Because in terms of love, which I have been using perhaps too much, in terms of love, if you have loved truly a person, if this life has been meaningful to you, the rest of your life can be marked by the life of the person that is now in God's keeping. You may be on earth a continuation of all that was good and praiseworthy in the life of this person. You may be the undoing of all the wrong there was in the life of this person. So that this person in a way can continue to have a destiny on earth, because a day will come when, thanks to you, what had been begun by this person will have been fulfilled, and what had been done amiss might have been put right. And that is an active participation in the eternal destiny. And on the other hand, where our treasure is, our heart is. And if we truly and earnestly believe that this person is alive, that we will meet, the death of a beloved person makes us already now citizen of the age to come. Not, again, only in wishful thinking, but really.